That's insane.
And on that previous
If
hand,
he open raises,
the
I
types
think
of
we
hands I
bet.
was representing for value were hands like Jack
I
9
think the
offsuit.
right
I could
size
have
is
some
4
Queen 9
times,
offsuit
so we're
there.
gonna 3-bet.
9-6. I can have some
Isn't it
King 10
like
off. I can also have some 10-8
just type
type
it.
hands. A lot of
5.
hands in my value
There we
range
go.
there. Okay, so I get 3-bet to 5. I think this is a pretty easy fold.
Okay, good. Nice. All right. Oh, Jack King. This is another open raise spot.
Ace
We're all
10 gonna be
using the same
3-betting this to
sizing
5.
because we don't want to have any toes with different sizings we use. Okay, so he 3-bets here. I think this is should be a call. Jack King is a strong enough hand, I
Okay,
think.
so he makes the call.
7-4-3. That doesn't really
Flop
favor
is
anyone's hand, to be
7-4-3
honest.
two-tone.
Actually, it might favor
Really
him
bad
because he might have
flop
a
for
bluff.
us, and most of the time
Like
this
for
is probably
example,
going to
if he has a
play
suited
as
connector,
a
like
range
5-6
check.
suited, that's dangerous.
So going to check range here and
Or
then see what kind of
suited.
sizing he puts out on this flop. He should be stabbing
I'd
this a fair
assume
bit
when
with some
he's
small
3-betting
sizings. And I think in 6-max, this would be kind of a clear check fold. But ranges are so wide and heads up that I think if I have, for instance, the backdoor flush draw here, which fails on this brick turn, I can check this again. And this turn check is protected by some overpairs. If I'm range checking flop, I'm going to have overpairs there all the time too. So by checking flop and then checking turn,
we should bet.
I'm not necessarily capping my range. I'm not capping my range to
balance out our range
to hands that can't face like a little bit of aggression.
Maybe I
against
should have done just
70%
7.5.
pot, this is a pretty easy fold.
Okay, he folds. Nice.
Okay, so we can.
Next hand is 7-4-3.
Okay. This is an interesting one. I think this is the first 3-bet pot we played.
Yep.
So I was dealt ace 10 off. Important to note, ace of clubs, 10 of diamonds.
I was dealt jack of clubs, king of hearts.
Okay, and I was in the big blind. You were in the small blind. You opened. I raised. And you called. And the board ran out 7, 4, 3, 5. And so here with the 10 of diamonds, I flopped a backdoor flush, backdoor flush draw to the 10. But this board is, not so favorable for me, I would think. The funny thing is Silver wants to bet this 31% of the time. I thought it was kind of a pure range check. Like I'm just doing really horribly on this type of a board, whereas, a lot of the hands that you have are going to be doing pretty well. You're going to be flatting 4s, 3s, 6-5 suited, and have a lot of kind of straighty type hands, and you get to play them in position. So with ace 10 off, I think okay. It wants to play aggressively with the ace of diamonds, backdoor flush draw. And if you don't have that, if you have kind of the if you have the 10 of diamonds, it wants to play less aggressively. And the reason it wants to do that is that essentially, with the ace of diamonds, two things. That one, your opponent cannot be. That one, you can improve to the nut flush by the river via running diamonds. And number two, your opponent often can't call as often because they don't have the nut flush draw, which should represent, like ace X suited should represent the most common kind of unpaired suited hand that you would call, right? You don't call all 3 bets with for instance, Jack X suited, but you would call all 3 bets and maybe sometimes 4 bet with Ace X suited. So you have a lot of Ace X suited. And what it's saying is I can bet more aggressively because, like you're not going to be able to connect with this flop as often when I have the ace of diamonds. With a 10 of diamonds, that's not so much the case, right? So here I opt for check. Your thoughts, please.
Yeah, so I thought it didn't really favor either of our range because with a 3-bet pot and the fact that all the cards on the flop were low cards, like I don't really think it favors your range. I also don't think it favors our range, but the fact or my range, but the fact that it's two-tone makes us. I thought it made our equities like draw closer to each other. Yeah. So I thought maybe I could represent like a suited connector, 5-6 or 8-9, with a flush and straight draw. But yeah,
I think you ended up checking this flop back.
yeah,
though.
I checked.
Yeah, and you had king high. Did you have any sort of backdoors?
No,
Okay, so no backdoors.
Yep.
All right, got it. Turn was a 5 of clubs, and here, like I think most of my range just has to kind of give up. Like I play check fold with high percentage of my range. Of course, I'm not check folding literally everything, but I would have to check all my overpairs here too. And now what I was saying was that I still have my overpairs here that check the flop. And those are the kinds of hands that I can check call with on the turn to protect my checking range so that you can't just bet every single time and then auto profit, right? I also would check some sorts of, I would definitely check a little bit of 6x here. And I probably wouldn't bet every single flush draw either. I would put a lot of those into my check calling range as well, so that I'm covered on board runouts that include, clubs or diamonds, for instance. And you can see here, like all these kind of big ace X offsuits all need a check. And they're protected by the aces, kings, and the portion of queens that also want to check. You also are supposed to check. You're also supposed to trap some straights here as well. So those do kind of protect my checking range. And if you look at hands like, for instance, king queen suited, right? Like I still have full frequency king queen suited here, and all of these check, regardless of which flush draw I have. Like I'm still checking so that when you bet the turn, I'm not completely devoid of flush draws, or I'm not completely devoid of calls. And when I call and the river comes, I'm covered on boards that have diamond and club. So check.
wait. So what does it mean to protect your checking range?
So essentially, if I didn't protect my checking range, that would be, for instance, leaving only weak hands in my checks.
Oh, so you're saying you're checking with the sixes?
Yeah,
Because then, like, yeah, because then in case the opponent bets, you can safely call without having to be destroyed by all of the opponent's bets.
Yeah, it actually dissuades the opponent from betting all
Yeah.
the time, and just forcing my ace highs to call, right? Because my ace highs do have showdown value here. A lot of your calls are going to be, some big suited cards, and an ace 10 offsuit can actually, beat a good portion of those, big suited cards.
Yeah.
Right. If you have some like, 2 Broadway hand, ace 10 offsuit is beating that. But if I never checked aces, for instance, here, then you could bet and force me to overfold these. Right?
Yep.
If I always bet aces, if I always bet any 6 that I had for a straight,
Yep.
then I'm unbalanced. And then when you see a check on this board, then you know, oh, I can't have a six, can't have aces,
Right.
can't have all these other strong hands that can, face some aggression. So I'm just gonna bet, and then like you're gonna be able to auto profit with your bluffs.
Ah,
So that's what protecting your checking range means. Essentially, what GTO wants to do is it makes it so that it's not exploitable at any part in the game tree. So like, okay, the checks are the checks, of medium strength showdown value hands are protected by hands that have, slightly higher equity versus, some hands that have slightly lower equity, right? So when you check, a lot of times you're going to have, some medium strength hand, but there are like, gradations within that medium strengthness, right? So, for instance, pocket jacks or pocket queens, pocket kings, pocket aces have more equity than ace 10 offsuit. They can actually beat, aces has a lot more equity compared to your bluffs than, for instance, like ace 10 does,
hmm,
right? But it doesn't want to play necessarily for a big pot, but it does make, for a good bluff catcher, for instance, right? Or sometimes it'll check like a nutted hand, right? Like a 6x here. That's a great example of check protecting your checking range, is not betting all your sixes. You, by not betting all your sixes, like you make it so that when your opponent bets, and you can call with some 6x, and then if he tries to go all in on the river against you, you have some straights to
yep.
to kind of protect yourself with, right?
So if you're not betting all your straights and all your nutted hands, then what are you betting?
Well, you are betting those at some lower frequency. You're just not betting them all
Oh,
the time
yeah,
per se, right? But the types of hands that you might want to bet for value here are like top pairs, right? Like you can see all the top pairs love betting this. You want to bet like some small over pairs, like jacks, for instance, wants to bet more frequently than aces, because aces are not so afraid of like queen, king, or ace coming. But
Yeah,
if with jacks, there's a lot of jam
Jacks
cards
need
that are, or
protection.
rivers that are like really bad for you.
Yep.
Right. So jacks kind of benefit more from equity denial than aces does. And that's, you can see that on full display here. Actually, a lot of the time on for instance, like low boards, the smallest overpairs want to bet more frequently than the biggest overpairs do. The biggest overpairs want to check.
right.
Sometimes they want to bet too, but a lot of them can check and protect your checking range, while the smallest overpairs benefit a lot more from equity denial.
Okay, makes sense.
And you can see, like the bluffs that you would have here, the kind of bottom of the range stuff are going to be like hands like queen 8 off. My guess is you'd probably be bluffing a lot of jack 8 off, a lot of 8x, because 8x blocks 8-7. It also blocks 8-6. Those are kind of the most natural hands that you might want to bluff with at a high frequency. So you can see like 8s are probably like the most natural part of your bluffing ratio.
Mhm.
Okay. So here, what did you decide to do?
So I bet pretty big. I bet 7.25 in a pot of 10, which is like around 75%.
Okay.
I thought that, like, I was going into the straight thinking that I could represent a suited connector, and since the 5 of clubs came, that would be good, because I do have like 6-8 in my range. I have sixes in my range, and so in the instance that I do end up having a 6, I need to balance it out with some bluffs, and I thought this was a good place to bluff.
Right. Yeah. I think, that read is spot on. When I checked twice, I've essentially said like, okay, I basically have a medium strength hand at best.
Yep.
I've essentially condensed my range twice. First on the flop by checking, right? Like now, I don't have the smallest overpairs, right? Like when I check the flop, what should go through your head is, okay, well, the hands that are most incentivized to bet the flop are like the small overpairs, the vulnerable top pairs, those types of hands, right? And when you don't do it, like you think about it this way, like GTO like still wants to mix those at some frequency, but humans, we're not so good at implementing these types of strategies,
Yeah.
right? We like to play pure like, check or bet, right? And so a lot of times, like when you're up against, of course, you're going to be playing against human opponents. When they check certain parts of their range, or when they bet certain parts, or excuse me, when they bet or when they check, you can basically categorically eliminate certain parts of their range just based on those actions, right? So
Mhm.
a lot of humans will look at the solver output and be like, okay, well, small overpairs are betting at a very high frequency here. That means I need to do it all the time, right? And so when you face a check, that means that, okay, now I can't have 8, 8, 9, 9, tens. A lot of times it'll mean like I can't have a set, right? Like
Yeah.
a lot of sets love betting on these types of boards that are like really drawy. It'll mean I can't have a hand like A7 suited, King 7 suited, A7 off, vulnerable top pairs. It'll mean I can't really have a hand like 6-5 suited or something like that. A lot of people love betting, nutted straights that don't block any of your opponents, that block few of your opponents, value region, right? Like 6-5 suited doesn't block your opponent from having a 7, for instance.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I check the flop, you can categorically eliminate those, right? I was kind of playing this as a range check, like, okay, I'm just going to check the flop with my entire range. But I guess the solver doesn't like that so much. And I think it's because, you can have a bunch of nutted hands with the 6-5 suited and, some sets. You can see here, solver is betting big with 8s, 9s, 10s, jacks,
Yep.
vulnerable over pairs.
That's great.
So when I check turn again, right, after you eliminate kind of the small overpairs from my range, I think that the turn check is probably like continues to condense my range, right? Like in reality, I might be betting some. In reality, I might be betting some flush draws here on the turn, more often than the solver would. Or at least your human opponents would be betting flush draw way more often than solver would on the turn. So when you see check on the turn, you should be like, okay, this guy probably doesn't have very many flush draws either, right? Like a lot of humans, we would probably bet flush draws all the time on the flop, whereas solver would bet them at a high frequency, but not always, right? So
Yep.
that is where it might be like a little over bluff relative to, over quote unquote semi bluff relative to the solver. And then this turn that, puts another flush draw out there again would be more over bluff relative to solver. So now you can say like, okay, didn't bet the flop, didn't bet the turn, probably doesn't have any flush draws either, doesn't have any small overpairs. You could probably still have some of the biggest overpairs here. That would make sense sometimes. Theoretically, I would even have 6s here, and I think in practice I would check 6s here sometimes too. So you would have to be aware of that. But most of my range looks pretty medium strength and pretty ace heavy too, right? I have all these aces that still want to check the turn. So look at my turn strategy. Like a lot of my checks come from these aces, and a lot of my bets come from these kind of bluffs that are like 2 sort of medium cards, right?
Yep.
Like I said, 8x before. So this is a bet with King Jack. What suited?
Offsuit.
Okay. Did you?
I didn't have a backdoor straight.
Well, I mean, did you have any like what were the suits?
Oh, Jack of Clubs, King of Hearts. So
I think the Jack of Clubs is good because it prevents me from
Right.
continuing. And yeah, you can see the only ones that don't really like that here are like the ones that have no suit connection to the board. But yeah, this type of bet, if you think about the threshold, you probably shouldn't be betting like king queen suited. That's what it's saying is like a medium strength hand and a 3-bet pot. And from six max, from what I remember about six max, like king queen suited is a pretty medium strength hand too. In that like you're actually, you know, if you're faced with the option to check or bet, like king queen suited is kind of the threshold. Like you almost always check king queen suited if you're like unpaired, right? Like you almost always check king queen suited, and then like below that you can start mixing bet because it's saying like this hand is too far down in your range to have any showdown value, whereas king queen suited has some showdown value.
Yep.
Same for these aces, right? Like all these aces have showdown value. Right, so that's why it's mostly check. But yeah, once you get to like king 10, king 9, king 8, like those hands too far down don't have any showdown value. I think it's true for both the aggressor and the defender. And so here you were the defender. A little better.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, yeah, I was a defender because you 3-bet into me
Yeah.
and then I called.
Oh, I was saying was that low battery.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So here. Here you bet, and then I have to fold ace 10 off. I'm guessing like, yeah, ace 10 off is, I mean, it's mixed call fold, but and again, when the solver mixes, it's saying two actions are essentially equal in EV. Saying, you know, like should be folding here. So I did. It was a nice bluff.
Let's go.
I think I don't think I was particularly gonna contemplate call. Like, of course, there's still one more street to be called. The game
Yeah.
doesn't end on the turn. Okay. And I would guess that maybe eights want to call less, or because having an 8 would kind of block a bluff. That's interesting. Ace 8 off. Ace 8 off is, wow, pure call. But the interesting thing is you kind of block a bluff. Oh, but you get some equity in terms of like if the river's a 6, then you just make a straight over straight.
Are you blocking a bluff?
Remember when we saw what your betting most frequently was, it was going to be hands that have like
Oh.
8s in them, right? Because when you have an 8, that reduces the chances that I have 8-7 suited or 8-6 suited.
So I'm bluffing with an 8 because I'm blocking an 8. But then if
Well, you're
you
blocking the most common combinations of 8, right?
right.
And if you had like Jack 8 or Queen 8 or something like that, those hands essentially have no showdown value here against my 3-bet range. Like the only hands something like Jack 8 suited has showdown value against is like 10-9 suited. That's literally like one combination, you know.
Yeah.
9-8 suited as well, but okay.